So some of you may have had a chance to watch the introductory videos that we sent around before this call, but I would love for the three panelists to introduce themselves to this group by going over their name, their graduation year, their majors and minors, what they currently do, and where they are currently located. So we'll start with Cindy, and then we'll go to Andy and Jacob.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Okereke, and I am Emory class of 2012. I majored in English and creative writing with a minor in linguistics, and I'm currently based in the LA area. And what I do right now, I am the founder of my own podcast marketing agency. I'm also a podcast consultant and podcast producer.
My name is Andy Tompkins. Good afternoon, morning, wherever we are. The Zoom thing always confuses me. So I am class of 95 at Emory College. I majored in English and double majored in biology. I was about to minor in French, but I ran out of time. Currently, I am a psychiatrist and the director of the Division of Substance Abuse and Addiction Medicine here at Mark Zuckerberg's San Francisco General Hospital. And on faculty at the University of California, San Francisco. My job is multifactorial. I still see patients suffering with addiction and other mental health conditions. I manage a large division, so I have 50 or so employees. And then I write grants and perform research on various topics, specifically related with developing new treatments for opioid use disorder and chronic pain. I love what I do. And I love that I was an English major because I think it really was helpful for me in getting this position.
Hello, everybody. Excuse me. My name is Jacob Silverman. I'm Emory class of 2006. I majored in English and creative writing, minored in history and Russian, and what else am I supposed to say? Oh, I'm a freelance journalist. I mostly write for the New Republic magazine here in New York. And that's about it.
Thank you guys so much. So first question, I'm excited to hear how you got from Emory to all of those interesting steps. But I want to start by asking you first to cast your mind back to when you first arrived at Emory. What did you want to study, and how did you ultimately decide to pursue a major in English or creative writing?
It's me, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I always knew that I was going to major in creative writing. So it was like creative writing and was what I approached my time at Emory. So the and was potentially, psychology. So I took some classes there. And then maybe anthropology, sociology, linguistics. Linguistics ended up being my minor. So I was very much open to the exploration of like what that second possibility of study was, but I always knew that English and creative writing was going to be in there somewhere, just because I always was drawn to it. They were always my favorite classes growing up, just English and reading books and all of that kind of stuff. And so I knew that needed to be part of my college career. And so that's how I ended up making the choice.
So I was the only one in my class from Kansas. So I grew up in a relatively small town. English, like Cindy, had been one of my favorite classes. My favorite teachers in high school were English. And so I knew I wanted to be an English major, but I also wanted to be a physician. So I sort of decided when I was 5 that I wanted to be a physician. So I didn't know if I could just be an English major. And there were so many pre-med requirements anyway that fit in with biology, and sort of landed on biology as sort of the de facto second major. But yeah, I mean, I fell in love with English from the very get-go, and I specifically focused on Old English. I thought, we know how many lines of Old English there are. It might be easier for me to try and understand it as an undergrad. But yeah, it was funny, and it was just a really good experience, because in some days I would study, books that were written before 1000 AD, and then study biological techniques like PCR that had been developed in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. So for me, it was a great juxtaposition, and I loved sort of that ability to do that.
I suppose for me, I knew coming in that English and writing were the most important things to me. I also knew, I think like Sydney, that I would do English and creative writing, or creative writing and some other things, but wasn't always sure what the other things were. I mean, I did give thought to double majoring maybe in history or in Russian also, both of which were pretty interesting to me. And I took a lot of classes in those departments and studied abroad in Russia for a summer. But I just, I had the bug. I never felt any sense of destiny or really strong feeling about anything else, even though I had other subjects that I was fortunate enough to be interested in and be able to take classes in. But yeah, for me, I just didn't feel like there was any other choice. I mean, fortunately, I felt validated in that I overall enjoyed my experience. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here right now.
So I would love to hear from you all, because it seems like you did know early that you wanted to major in English. So I'd love to hear if there was a particular class or a moment or an experience early in your Emory career where you thought this was right. Like, I knew I wanted to do this, and here I am. I'm loving this right now. And feel free to jump in whenever.
Well, I'll jump in, I suppose. I think for me, actually, it was two things. One, it was having classes that really appealed to me. And some of those were just the broad survey courses, and some of those were the more engaged, smaller courses like the Romanticism course, whose name I'm blanking on right now, was really big for me, or a Southern Literature course. But also there was a bit of a process of elimination in that I took other courses, especially freshman year, and tried to sort of dig around and explore. And I liked some of them, but they never had the sense of enjoyment, of aptitude, of feeling like, oh, I belong, I know this stuff, or I could know this stuff, I could learn how to understand this whole intellectual milieu. So for me, it was just as much of learning about what I didn't really want to follow, but was maybe still interested in, and then comparing that to actually being in these English courses and feeling really engaged and moved.
I'll also echo that, because I can't exactly think of the moment or the course, but I do remember just always feeling after I left my English classes, or I would select them for this semester, being like really excited. So I think my first English course was like a mass media kind of exploration. I don't remember what the title was exactly, but it was so much fun. And it was like a English 101 like class. And then, taking a sci-fi like literature class. And I knew nothing about sci-fi, and I thought I might not even really be engaged, but it always provided me with something. And then that also just echoed with all of my creative writing courses, including like nonfiction. I think was a pretty pivotal one for me, as well as just all my poetry classes, because that was the original purpose of my creative writing major, was to mostly focus on poetry, but I ended up discovering nonfiction along the way as well. So yeah.
And for me, I actually didn't take an English course until my second semester, my first year, and I took it because it was located in the chemistry building, and I had to go to organic chemistry classes anyway. But it was an amazing experience. By the way, the professor hated the chemistry building, so eventually she moved the class to, I think, the church school building. But her name was Professor Harris, and she taught Introduction to Poetry, which I'd never really read in high school. I was very afraid of for whatever reason. And I think just the first or second day there, I knew like this was an engaging professor. I knew I wanted to take more. Unfortunately, she left the faculty, I think, soon after that. But the time during that course was reading T.S. Eliot's The Dead, which is a powerful poem. For me, not growing up with a lot of the references, it was also me just searching to mean what he was talking about and going through some of the mythology he was referencing. But I knew that I couldn't put this down. Like, I would stay up, whereas I'd fall asleep studying chemistry, but I would stay up reading poetry. And I think that was a very important moment for me.
Were there moments in your time as an English major where you were really surprised by the content that you were learning, or the approach that a professor was taking to teaching a subject or a text? A moment when you felt like, I didn't expect this is what an English major did, but it's fascinating anyways.
I think it goes back to that like freshman year English class I took. Like, we read a bunch of graphic novels within it, and so it was fun to know, I guess, or learn that like literature can be more expansive, and it can encompass like having really, really deep like discussions about things that are media related, and like books being part of media, and how they kind of talk to each other, and how the different like eras of media and like eras of literature can create for a really full and round discussion. And it's something that ended up always staying with me within all of my courses, is like thinking about what's beyond the book and what's beyond the text, and like that context in history, and how to pull it into the modern space. I think that, I guess, maybe didn't surprise me, but it was just that I feel like most of my professors just were very open to those like ideas and concepts of kind of thinking beyond just what a traditional book is. Yeah.
I remember being in a creative writing class, and professor, I think his name was Carpenter, he's from Oxford, the Emory affiliated Oxford, and he showed us it was one word, the word engine, and he asked us if it was a poem or a story. And that was one. I mean, it was sort of a slightly absurd, silly moment, but when a professor sort of breaks that out, you realize you're going to be doing some sort of out of the box thinking. And I just enjoyed that creative writing class, as I did most of mine. But in terms of distinctiveness of approach, I don't know. I think what struck me more was rigor, because I went to a pretty good high school, but you're learning more sort of a approach to a lot of these topics by people who are specialized and well trained and everything like that. But obviously, when you get to college, you have people with real specialties and PhDs and all the years of research that comes with that. So there's sort of a different kind of devotion to a topic that I didn't even really know was possible, probably when I was only 17 or 18.
I don't know if this is a recommended approach, but I remember the last day of our Celtic literature course was spent in an Irish pub. And I still remember that. And then the other one was the president of Emory was also an English professor when I was there, Dr. Jason. So he taught a course on James Joyce. And it was described as the hardest English course on campus. So of course, me being an overachiever, I was like, I'm going to take that and I'm going to do well. And it was one of the most challenging courses. And there were people auditing it who were professional writers. And, I felt sort of amazing that I could be there amongst all these great graduate students, people in the community, and then little me learning about this. And I must admit, I didn't quite understand everything. And so part of my journey, going to medical school and doing the rest of it was keeping all of my books. And when I found an opportunity to go back to them and read them more for myself and more for enjoyment, and and that I think was an amazing gift that I had, to go back to all these things. And now having 10 years or whatever, now it's 20 years of life experience, I can better understand what the characters were going through, what the authors were writing, and then hopefully bring that also to other books that I get to read and the things that I write.
So I do want to talk about how you got from Emory to your current role, but Andy, you brought it up, so I'm going to ask it now. What role does your English major play in your life beyond your professional identity? You mentioned revisiting your books all these years later and having a different experience with the literature. I'd be curious to know, the rest of you, how does the humanities enrich your life now outside of your professional work?
Well, it's a very loaded question, but I will try to do my best to answer it. So I come from a very spiritual background. My father was a Baptist minister growing up, and so I brought that to my Emory College experience, and sort of rebelling against that. And in my own spiritual journey outside of work, I think the English language and the work that people do to understand spirituality and how it may impact or influence or have nothing to do with their life has been really a pleasurable thing for me to get to explore. Certainly, I still attend services when I go back home. He now lives in Peculiar, Missouri, which is a very interesting place. Go and visit it. But bringing that aspect of seeing, specifically with T.S. Eliot was the first person going through a fundamental conversion experience and using that in his literature and his poetry, I think was an amazing sort of eye-opening experience to me that, I certainly don't write literature or poetry, but in the human interactions I have as a psychiatrist, getting to listen to the human story and suffering, I can hearken back to the first times I did that was in reading, during high school and college. I never took a psychology course. We certainly didn't talk to people as part of biology or chemistry, but in reading about the lived experience of a character really helped me and it helps me to this day. But I think sort of my spiritual journey is where I would see it most as helpful.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go, just because I have a hard time pulling those things apart because I've kind of just made it all my life and leisure. So I'm just kind of like, yes. Like from the different podcast shows that I work on, like reading the different stories or the books that people have like coming onto the program so that I can better craft an interview, or kind of like incorporating the poetry aspect to it. Like I, as a publicist, would write like really beautiful press releases or just like pitch letters, and it always surprised my boss. Ironically, I'm not sure why. I was like, I did major in creative writing after all, and I think it's just finding ways to kind of like pull those things in, and know that just because it's a press release about some like a, I don't know, like a product or something or product update, it doesn't have to not be fun. And that's also what was so beautiful about like the creative nonfiction class that or classes, I think, that I took, is that nonfiction and like biography and memoir don't have to be dry, even though that's kind of what at the time people just expected of them. And it's been really lovely to start to see that incorporated into more of the books and things that people are reading these days.
So for me, I suppose I spend a lot of the day writing, and I'm one of those people who has a hard time separating work from personal life, especially in the COVID era. I think what sort of the English experience, if you commit yourself to it, what it does well is it gives you kind of equipment for living, for arguing, for perceiving the world, for thinking critically, and that can manifest itself in all kinds of ways. So it could be in terms of writing something in some other context that's totally not work related. It could be just sort of having a friendly argument with a friend or debate about some subject. But I don't know. Also, for me, I write some fiction in my free time, and I'm working on a novel, so um, it's kind of hard for me to escape writing in one form or another.
Thank you all. So I asked you to cast your mind back to your first arrival at Emory and tell me about how you decided to become an English major. Now I want to ask you to cast your mind back to your final days at Emory, maybe your last semester. What did you think was next for you? What jobs or experiences or opportunities did you think you wanted to pursue after your graduation? And does that match up with what you're doing now?
Well, my last year was, my last semester was very interesting. So, my entire life I'd been working towards a goal of being a physician, and I didn't actually get into medical school the first time I applied. And so, that last semester, I was growing out my beard. I was like, I've never grown out my beard. I might as well try that. My life was over. I don't know. I was going to go back to my parents' house and, live in the basement. And I don't know. I'm a little dramatic sometimes, but, but at the same time, I was also taking some very interesting courses. I was writing a thesis. I'd actually tried to write two theses, one on T.S. Eliot and one in biology on the experiments I was doing. I had to give up one of them. I just didn't have enough time. But yeah, I mean, knowing that characters had overcome things like this, and now looking back 20 years later, it was probably the best year of my life. So, not getting into medical school, not doing the thing I was supposed to do. And then the next year I learned I was gay. Oh no. So just having my entire, identity transformed, but not be struggling with medical school, but being able to do this, with a year where I moved to Baltimore, Maryland. I'd never been to Baltimore my entire life. Got a job working in a lab, which is the only thing I necessarily knew how to do. But, also reading books, dyeing my hair, making mistakes, finding love, losing love, that whole year I could not have done without the literature that I'd been given as a part of my English major. And it was a hard year. It's certainly, I don't wish people to not get what they want, but those obstacles overcome are the things that have made me the person that I am, and to have the life that I have now. And so, yeah.
Yeah, similarly to Andy, I honestly had no idea what I was going to do or what jobs there were. Like, I know that I had gone to the career center and applied to things and done things and gotten dressed up and went to the career fairs, and nothing was ever appealing or nothing was ever kind of connecting in that way. And I remember I spent like in between the really fun moments of just like spending time with like my friends and the people at Emory, because I think that's the other thing that the humanities allowed me to do, because the classes were a lot more intimate. Often like you would make these like really interesting and deep connections, and like they'd also kind of scatter all through campus, so you felt like you just knew more people as well. Which I also feel like it just prepared me, I guess, to the possibility of just asking people like, what are you doing? Or like, what can I do? Like, what do you recommend? I don't know. Just because, yeah, I really had no idea, and I wanted to have a job, and I felt like all my B school friends and all my pre-med or pre-law or like pre-grad school, like they were all set, and I was just kind of like, I guess I'm just gonna pack my stuff and go live in my parents' basement, and see what happens. And even through that, like I ended up connecting with a friend from high school who, like, she majored in English at NYU, and she like had an internship that she was now like moving on from, and she was able to just like recommend me for it. So I essentially got a job at a book publishing company through literally just like being able to connect and talk to like anybody, or really like listen to people's stories and try and understand the things that they like, don't like, or understanding a little bit about myself of like, what do I like, what don't I like. And so it's kind of a way I stumbled into it, and like I guess overcame feeling lost, but there was still a lot of feeling lost like all along the way. And I also feel like all the stories that you kind of learn about or read in English class also prepare you for knowing that your life is going to be in all these different stages, and all these different transitionals. And despite you feeling lost, you're kind of on your own hero's journey. And I think that's something that just stayed with me throughout like my 20s, to be honest. Because in terms of career path, it's been winding.
Yeah, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything when I got to college. I knew a little bit more maybe about life or academics when I graduated, but I knew nothing about how do you get a job, how do you apply for jobs, what should I be looking for, all those things. I did try to, I think, go to a career center and a career counselor at one point, and I did various things. I stayed in Atlanta for a year and worked there, and then I went abroad and for 6 months, and then I came back just in time for the 2008 economic crash. So for me, a big part of my whole adult life really has been shaped by the 2008 economic crash, and certainly my career, which is all over the place, and it's mostly involved me being a freelancer and doing other odd jobs and working in a bookstore, teaching Hebrew school. I did a lot of different things. So, if I could put a more positive spin on it, I guess one thing I'd say is that um, be adventurous and creative and curious, but also be deliberate about some of your choices. I think I did some things off the beaten path, like did an internship at a very small magazine instead of looking for a more prominent publication that might have helped me more professionally, things like that. And I don't necessarily regret it, but I think there are ways you can think about, like, not in a totally sort of calculating mercenary way, but how will this help me, and how will this sort of set me up for what I might want to do next. And that's not to say don't follow your impulses or do strange things that suddenly land on your plate and someone's offering, you a job somewhere and you say, sure, I'll move to Denmark. But I think also there's a way in which to think more deliberately about what's ahead. And I wish I had more of a balance of that in my 20s, I think.
Yeah, so it sounds like for each of you, the career discernment process involved a little bit of soul searching, a little bit of feeling lost. Cindy, you mentioned the value of talking to people and just, doing informational interviews and putting yourself out there and learning about what different kinds of options are available. Jacob, you mentioned feeling adventurous, but also being deliberate about your choices. So, because this is an initiative designed to help students think about what their pathways are after their time at Emory, I'd love to know if you guys had any more ideas or insight or wisdom you wish you had known about finding a professional pathway.
Yeah, I think, at least for me, I felt like I wish there were more programs, I guess, like this that spoke to like the feelings of being a humanities major, or just because I feel like when I would go to like the career like fairs or, you know, that they would have in the Duck at the time, like it felt like everything was like very corporate, or I needed to have like a resume that was like finally edited by the best resume writer person ever. Or it was like networking, this is how you do it. And it's like, you make sure that you like exchange business cards and you do this. And what I found is a lot of those things are were the opposite of what I feel like was super, super ingrained. In terms of networking, a lot of it is like, are you making a real like connection? Like, genuinely, do you want to know about this person? Are you interested in their story? Like, do you want to like get stuck on a layover with them in the airport? And like, what are you guys going to talk about? And so I think like an emphasis on some of the softer skills was something that I always like, I guess, craved, because at the time I didn't have the words to articulate that. I was like, I know that I'm going to be fine. Granted, I'm not getting an investment banker job on Wall Street, but I know that I'm going to be fine. And some of those same people like are now just like, how did you do it? That's so cool. Like this creative thing that you're like, how did you get in touch with XYZ person? It was like, I think I maybe met them out once. And like, we ended up talking like about this strange book that they were reading. And then I like mentioned that like, oh yeah, like in like, let's say it's Lovecraft country, right? And like, they have all these like really deep like literature references. And I started talking about them to somebody and they were like, oh my God, wait, like, I can't believe you know that book, or like whatever it is. And then now you have like a brand new conversation and you've like sparked something for someone. And now they like remember you because it's not the same, like, oh, where do you work? And like, what do you do? And like, what are your hobbies? Like that are kind of standard. Instead, you're finding a real avenue of like getting to know that person. And so I think like for me, I wish that there were more things like that, not necessarily like mock interviews, but just almost like speed. I don't even know actually how you would do it. But that's me.
Well, we hope this conversation is a start for that, for more students.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm kind of dating myself, but you know, I applied for a job, my first job online, right out of college. So this is when I was at my parents' basement, or maybe attic, one of the two. And I didn't necessarily want to stay there for an entire year. So I applied for a job and they called me up for an interview. There was two jobs, one in Boston. They actually flew me out and I actually had an interview in person. And the one in Baltimore is like, well, we don't have money for that, but we can talk to you on the phone and seems like you have a good resume. I think it was very cursory. I think they just needed somebody, but they're like, do you want the job? And I was like, I've never been to Baltimore, but sure, you're hiring me, and I can start in a couple of weeks. Now knowing what it takes to get a person hired in an academic institution, I'm just so surprised that this happened. But you know, I basically flew. My brother lived in DC, so I at least knew one person. They found me a place that cost $275 a month, so you can imagine that sort of what it was like to live there. But it was great, and part of that interview was me talking about this is where I go back into English literature. So learning about colonial literature and what it was like to be an Indian American. You know, the PI was born in India, but moved to the United States, had done graduate school here. And so we talked a little bit about India and what I'd learned about the experience through some of the works I was reading. And I don't know if that was it, but it certainly really helped. And, you know, I had a great year with her. And she was a great mentor. And, you know, that thing, just like putting your resume out there, you know, answering a phone call, moving someplace sight unseen, be willing to go through, you know, whatever you had to do just to keep going was a wonderful experience for me. And likewise, like I had a random person from Emory when I was in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins who just randomly said, I need a job for the summer. I think he was doing his MPH, and I need an internship. Can I work for you? And that's not exactly how it worked. It actually, his wife asked for him at an Emory alumni event at a bar. And I was like, oh, sure, it sounds like an interesting. And we needed somebody for the summer, and he was a great person. And that's sort of like just the way that networking can work. You know, a lot of things, of course, are online through social media now, but I still prefer sort of like the in-person connection. And that's part of when I interview and hire people, is by talking about random things on the interview, or sometimes I just ask about things that they have read, just to throw a little something out there while we have a great conversation.
I often interview people as in the course of my work for articles and things like that, but I suppose I'm not very good at networking or some of those establishing those kinds of connections, though I totally affirm and echo what's been said before me by the other panelists. I think it can be very difficult if you sort of tilt shy or just find difficulty in those kinds of interactions. But I have noticed that people do like to talk about what they do. You don't have to necessarily flatter them from the get-go, but you know, people like to talk about where they're at, what's interesting about their work, and that can be as valuable as anything else. Trying to think, was there anything? Do you mind restating the question? Then I can just add a little bit more, or is
Yeah,
there anything else you need?
the question was just, what is some wisdom you wish you had known about career discernment?
Oh, right. One thing
Yeah.
I had in mind that slipped for a second was I think also if there's a particular organization or a company or an NGO or whatever else it might be that you find really interesting, whether they have an opening or not, I think that try to engage that organization or someone who works there. Sometimes, getting your foot in the door truly is better than finding the ideal position. And if there's an organization that is doing great stuff, but they're hiring for the equivalent of the mailroom or something like that, or just on a temp basis or anything like that, that's obviously not ideal for how you might want to start, especially if you really need full-time work. But I am a strong believer in the notion that you don't know where things end up. So whether that means engaging with some organization that you're not getting the great entry-level job you want, or it means being a bartender because that's convenient right now and the bar is right down the street and you might meet some people. I think that following those kinds of possibilities are really worthwhile.
Yeah, I get a lot of people just randomly emailing me and calling me. I don't necessarily reply to all of them, but it takes guts, and there's no downside really to that. So that certainly is one way. And then making connections. I still go on LinkedIn and all these other websites we talked about and sort of see, differences of separation. And like, oh, that's a very interesting person. And sometimes they accept my request, sometimes they don't. That's okay.
I will say I found all three of these terrific alums through LinkedIn. So it is a valuable tool to find people and connect with them, even if you're complete strangers. I encourage it, be brave and send that message. So Jacob, you mentioned that people like talking about what they do, and I definitely believe that to be true. I would love to hear from each of you a little bit more about what you currently do. And if you could also talk about whether there are certain moments where what you learned as an English major have really helped you be successful in your work right now.
I guess I'll go first. I don't know if that was lobbed at me first, but let's see. So I'm a freelance journalist and have been in one form or another for basically about 12 years. Sorry, there might be a little background noise of my toddler being reluctant to go to bed, but maybe you don't hear it. Anyway, like I said, my career experience has been really influenced by the recession. So I came back to the US after about 6 months abroad in 2008, and the I literally moved into my parents' basement and assumed that life, and then the economy crashed. And I did have different odd jobs working for a website. I started writing book reviews. I taught Hebrew school. But this is again why I'm sort of talking about the need to kind of strategize, but also be open to the opportunities in front of you. And so what I did was I never thought of myself as a journalist. I was really obsessed with literature. I thought I was going to write a whole bunch of novels and that would be it. And so I sort of backed into journalism, and while I learned to really appreciate and believe in it, and appreciate the flexibility that freelance journalism gives me, um, it was sort of an accident. And I started with book reviews for a while and kind of lower stakes culture reporting. And then I sort of, as I bulked up my skills and learned a bit more, I moved on to other subjects and I write about tech a lot and kind of the politics of tech. And I'm kind of a critic of the big tech companies. In terms of what helps, I think in a lot of ways, my education translated pretty one-to-one. I mean, I write a lot. I'm often writing, trying to persuade people of something or make an argument. And it's so much like what you do in college, which is, I mean, everything has to be original, based in facts. You want to persuade your reader, but you don't want to beat them over the head. You want to have some artfulness to your writing. I mean, in journalism, it's a little different because you don't want to show off. You want to more communicate the facts and the situation to a reader, unless it's just a straight up op-ed piece. But a lot of that stuff, and especially learning how to research, really translated to doing freelance journalism. And in a lot of ways, I think I've learned a lot from talking to people and from really understanding how little I knew when I came into the field, and kind of just being open to learn more. But if you have those base skills of writing and research and curiosity and willingness to listen to people, those go pretty far. One other thing I'll add, I'm sorry, I don't mean to ramble too much, but one thing I didn't realize is that a lot of people can't write or have difficulty with it. You know, this is not a pejorative judgment on people. It's just, it's difficult for some people. Some people are brilliant at one thing, and then writing an email or a memo is very difficult. So if you're at some kind of company where you might often be drafted into doing writing memos or research or requests for research grants or things like that, or any other number of things, because those skills are actually valued. I've had a couple experiences of ghostwriting also for people. They haven't always been the most successful because they've been mostly for corporate CEO types, and that's not really my type of person. But I think what it's taught me is that those skills can be in demand, and they can be flexible and portable to different contexts. So whether you're writing for an NGO, a press release, or doing a grant application, or writing for a magazine, or writing a speech for a CEO or something like that, there are a lot more possibilities for writing in what's often cast as a STEM dominant world. So I think it's good to sort of retain some of that optimism and some of that openness to say, like, okay, I could end up doing something much different than I expect, but I might still be writing.
And the question was like how my major, I use it currently with what I do. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. It's definitely a part of everything, because a lot of my background was in social media, and so it ended up becoming like copywriting, and knowing kind of the beats of a story. That's something that kind of just translates across every medium. So whether it's trying to figure out like how to cut this down to a 30-second Twitter video, or crafting a 45-minute like podcast interview, and like taking out the moments that don't make sense, and pulling out a clip that's like, this should be the highlight, like this should be kind of like the marquee piece that we like build everything around. And then like writing memos and press releases. And just as Jacob said, like you'll be surprised, like even on your worst days writing, you're like, oh man, that was not great. And like, I can hear a professor right now saying that was awful. Like that was great. It was great. It was well communicated. It was it was interesting. And I think it also gave me a lot of confidence in that area, because I too also had a lot of different types of jobs along the way, and like trying to be strategic about knowing that I wanted to work in marketing. Because ironically, I didn't really have the desire to publish a poetry book. Like, maybe, I don't know, but it wasn't like that was the goal for me in terms of my creative writing degree, ironically. And so I always kind of knew that like writing is going to be foundational to anything that I do. And so I found myself in content marketing, which was a lot of, blog, like writing, editing, a lot of strategizing the different stories, and like podcasting now too. That's a lot of writing as well, whether that's the intro, the outro, the show notes, all of that. And so it definitely is a very versatile skill that's super underrated, especially like the research aspect of it. And then just being open to learning, like really, really deep learning, and knowing that you might be wrong. And because like I started a business and, like talked to, someone who knew me in undergrad, like, I don't know if they would see that for me, just because it's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of bookkeeping, it's a lot of like contracts and things. But like, I always read my own contracts, and I like work really hard to like understand the language within it. And I was also very surprised at some of the like bosses that I've had in the past, where like that portion was difficult for them, just because like their foundation wasn't in, trying to decipher an old English text and like having to look up every other word and like structure that into, modern language and everything. And so I really do think that I use it every day, and so much so that I forget like how else I'm using it. So I guess it's working.
And so for me, my days are varied. I like that. I don't like doing the same thing every day. So Fridays I see patients. Mondays I have a lot of administrative meetings where we're constantly worried about money and me writing grants for more money. And then I still do human subjects research. So I bring in people and run them through a protocol. We're always looking for better treatments. I never thought I would go into drug development, but I certainly have worked with a lot of pharmaceutical companies who are trying to make a difference. One of the largest, most destructive plagues of my lifetime has been opioid use disorder and chronic pain. And being involved with that has been fortuitous. It's not what I, started out to be. I thought I would be a small town doctor in Kansas, and now I'm not. So most of my patients are homeless, people struggling to really quit doing a lot of different substances, including opioids, methamphetamine. I know most of the street lingo for all the drugs. I know how much they cost. I did not know any of that growing up. But everyone has a story to tell. And so still my favorite things are doing meeting with patients and learning what their struggles are, and really coming to terms, not only as a psychiatrist trying to understand their diagnosis and perfect a treatment plan, but also be a safe space for them to lay down where they don't. I mean, imagine if you have to carry all of your possessions and move around every day, worry about where you're going to eat, where you're going to get a shower, how you're going to get your next fix. It's an incredible job. And to just honor someone's humanity and sit with them is still a great gift that I'm able to do. And a lot of that I can go back to the English that I did. Yes, I write emails. Yes, I try and persuade the supervisors of San Francisco that all my programs are worth funding. And yes, it's an economic downturn, and I understand that, but we're important too. And being able to be that voice for my patients who don't have it. And then the last thing I try and do is stay out of the newspapers as much as I possibly can, because when I'm in the newspaper, Usually that's for something that's not gone right. But even, even when I find, something in there on a Sunday, it's a call to action, and it's amazing what an article in the local paper still has the power to change things, especially for someone suffering with addiction. It doesn't always work that way, but sometimes working with journalists to have them, point out specific things that hopefully can get, a call to action. And then lastly, I'm always trying to raise more money. You can do that in many different ways these days, but certainly I don't necessarily know how English majors can be involved with that, but certainly be able to talk about any subject and listen is very powerful, especially when you're a donor and you can give money to any different cause. Really having somebody listen to you is still an amazing thing.
Thank you all so much for answering that question. So I would love to now open it up to questions from the audience. So if you are willing to be brave and turn on your video, you can go ahead and use the raise hand button, and that will signal to me to call on you. But if you're not in a position to do that, totally fine. Go ahead and post something in the chat, and I'll keep track, and I can ask the panelists that way. We have Tamar. Would you like to go ahead with your first question?
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys so much for coming to speak to us. This is really helpful. I'm a senior right now, so I'm thinking about what I'm going to do after college and everything. I was just wondering, your first job after college, what was that experience like for you guys? Because right now, a lot of me and my friends were just thinking about, we just want to get that first job. It doesn't matter if we like it or not. We just need a job. And how long was your journey to find a job that you finally liked, or was it that first job? And what did you do if you didn't like that first job?
I guess I'll start. So I guess I started the internship that I mentioned at the book publishing company, I think like August or so of my graduation year, so August 2012. And then I was there for a while, and then and one of the other publicity assistants ended up quitting, and so I applied for the job because I was already there, available and capable of doing full-time work. I just happened to be working part-time. And so I interviewed, I ended up getting the position. It was one of those things where I was like, this is fine. All I wanted was a job, like a full-time job that I could put on my resume and, like, I guess, learn more about what it is that I wanted to do. I didn't love that job. And I liked my bosses enough, but in terms of like mentorship or really learning more about like how they got to where they got, they weren't really accessible to me. So I ended up finding that I learned more from my like peers, or like slightly higher up the rung than I was. And then that was also where I learned that like I really love cross-departmental functions, because at the time, and I don't know if it's still like this today, but like PR was like very much its own silo, marketing was its own silo, and like digital, like for book publishing, ours was kind of like tucked in the back because they were like, people really need to buy physical books. And I was like, but people also like options. So like we should probably incorporate them into like our campaigns and stuff. And so like I don't know if I stepped out of the line when I did this, but when I did end up pitching and landing like a placement for one of the books that I was representing, I ended up doing a digital partnership with O Magazine. And so they did a preview copy like of the first 2 chapters or something. And it ended up being like one of our biggest like placements for a book that essentially was given to like a super low level entry level publicist, because it wasn't really like the big marquee book that they needed to put all the resources in. So that's another thing I always tell people is like, make the most of the opportunities that are given to you. Like, I know that it was like a throwaway book, but it wasn't a throwaway book to me. It was my book. And I was like, I'm going to do what I need to do to like do right by this author. And that included also getting him involved more on like social media at the time. And like he ended up finding like a lot of success that way too. Like after the book came or after the placement came out in O Magazine, he found the editor on like Twitter and like thanked them for, you know, putting it up and all of these different things that I'm sure they probably still have some type of relationship if possible. I don't know, but it was a while ago. But I always suggest making the most of any opportunity. I was only there about a year because I knew that like after my review came up, I knew that one, I wasn't really feeling it. And I knew that I had to find something else that was a little bit more like future facing. So like working more directly in social media and like marketing, just because the pace of it was like a lot quicker and you could be a lot more creative, because people were kind of like growing towards that direction.
I guess for me, I think 3 or 4 days before graduation, I took the GREs and applied for public health school at Emory and got in. Then didn't get any financial aid. So I only did a summer there and then sort of had to drop out and move back home with my parents. And then, you know, my first job was as a research technician in Baltimore in a physiology lab. So moving more towards what I'd done with my biology major. But that was, you know, a job that I made the most of. You know, I was able to do experiments that got me my first publication. And although it was very, very small, we found the gene that was involved with Haley disease. I didn't know what Haley disease was, but it was amazing to be involved with a project like that. And, you know, that was sort of my experience. And then the creative side, it's just funny and had nothing to do with the job, but it was a very strange thing, but it was like a holiday door decorating contest where we had to decorate your door, and people are, you know, in the various science labs got graded on them. And, you know, this was back when they had the first genetic engineered cow, Dolly. So we made a Christmas tree of genetically engineered objects of the future that we thought was going to, and it was just a funny little project that I was like, I love this, I'm going to do it. And we got second prize and we won, I don't know, $100 or something. And I used it to sort of throw a little party for people. And that sort of experience got me to know somebody who knew a psychiatrist that I could rotate through. And I was like, I'm interested in psychiatric illness. I've never taken a psychology course. Can I actually go and rotate and spend my free time? And my boss, they start late in science, so she didn't get there till like 10. So I spent for like 7:30 to 10 on an inpatient psychiatric ward, just, you know, shadowing and experiencing what that life was like, and really falling in love with the patients and what this specific psychiatrist I was shadowing was doing. And then I would go to my lab and, you know, mutate yeast and E. coli, and it was kind of fun. And then, you know, it was a great experience. You know, I you know, had never been to this place. I'd never been to Baltimore. I went there, I knew nobody. So it was challenging for me socially, but, you know, eventually, you know, that I used that time to really come to terms with who I was and do a lot of soul searching. And I'm sure I wrote some journal article or like some journal that are probably pretty bad, but, you know, really just spend my year after college. And the other thing is I wanted a job that could help me pay off student loans. So that was the one thing I was so proud of. So I could start paying off student loans, even that first job.
Let's see. I had a bit of trouble finding a job at first. I had a couple of interviews, and then what I ended up doing was I just started volunteering at the ACLU in Atlanta, because I needed something to do, and it was sort of like an internship, and I was just doing some work there, and then I actually found a job. I wouldn't say it was a great job because I quit after a little less than a year and then fled the country. In some ways, I'm still looking for a job I like, to be honest. I just the way my career has developed, I found a lot more satisfaction in projects and individual projects and in articles I write than in and in relationships with people, with editors and friends and colleagues than I have really with, I guess, my anything else sort of job related. My whether it's been a time I've actually been on contract somewhere, or I haven't really been full-time on staff at any publication, but somehow managed to get by for 12 years. But it helps to have a spouse who works in a more stable industry. That's another random bit of advice I'd offer. Not that it was really asked for, but try to date and or marry someone who does something different than you. I think that's good just for sort of broadening one's horizons, but especially if you're in a tough industry, you know, there's less, you don't feel kind of competitive with your significant other. You can talk about other things. It doesn't keep you so self-absorbed, as I've learned about myself. Because for example, my wife is a social worker, and talking to her, I learn a lot, and I also learn a lot about how it's a much bigger and more dire world than, you know, whatever editor is annoying me that day. So I guess if you end up kind of on a sort of circuitous path like I've been, sometimes you have to find satisfaction not in the job itself, but in the relationships or the projects, or maybe even in just the individual pieces of work you're doing. And that's sort of been a hard lesson for me to learn, but it's definitely been a sustaining one, because I have a lot of frustrations with journalism. I would not necessarily say don't do it, but I have a lot of caveats that attach to anyone who is interested in doing it. So especially if you're working in a tough industry in any way, or a tough job, you have to find those kinds of coping strategies.
I'll also just add on to that in terms of, I guess, like keeping an open mind for like how your skills can transfer, because along this process, like I've worked in like startup spaces or smaller companies, because you get a lot of experience that way. So like I would consider my second entry level job the one that I got when I first moved out to LA. And that was also another one where it's like, make the most of every single opportunity that you're given, and just like take whatever you're super interested in with it and just like go full force. And along the way, because I'm working in these kind of like smaller companies, like they go through like restructurings, or they're like bought, and so your department might end up like gone, and like you're laid off, and you have to like look for something else. But I feel like I've been fortunate to land on my feet, because I have a clear idea of like what it is that I can do and stay open. So like after that first job that I mentioned, I like went to law school for exactly a semester, and I was like, this is definitely not it for me. And then I just stopped going back. I was like, I'm just gonna take a sabbatical, or I don't know. And then just never went back. And so then after that, I was just folding pants at the Garden State Plaza and at Lululemon. But because Lululemon has like a culture of like entrepreneurship within it, I was allowed to take over kind of like the in-store like email marketing and like social media. And so I was able to kind of manage that and like, you know, put together photo shoots and like organize like community like events and things. And so those were all skills that I essentially like was like, I really like this and I'm good at it. And it's like this much of my job. How do I get my next job to be like this much more of what I like, while I'm still like, even if it was still another job that kind of sucked, but I'm like, if I can get to 50-50, that would be dope. And then eventually it's like, if I can get to 80%, if I can get to 90, and like sometimes it fluctuates, because even like, I'll be honest, even now, like owning my own company and like creating my own time, there are still projects that sometimes I take on because I'm like, I just need the money, and like it's maybe a 20% in the grand scheme of like the things that I enjoy doing, but I'm good at it, and that's going to be a stable check for these like couple months. But yeah, project based is also really more fun for me as well. Start and end.
Any other questions in the chat, or if you want to turn the video off and ask a question for our three panelists?
I'm always a fan for asking questions of the audience, if that's okay.
I think so, yeah.
I don't get to work a lot with undergrads anymore, and so I wondered what it was like. What's it like to be an English major at Emory today, and what do you like about it, and what are you hoping for the future?
And this question can be answered by students even if they have not decided to be an English major yet. If anyone is in an English class currently and wants to share a little bit about their experience, I invite you to.
I can start. I'm an English creative writing major, and I came to Emory for the creative writing program, which has been amazing. And I just love the freedom that the major affords me. So I've taken a lot of different courses across the college. I've dabbled in psychology and sociology and like all these different things that really influence my writing. And yeah, my advisor just pushes me to take courses that I'm genuinely interested in. And he made it easy for me to go abroad and take English classes in Australia, which was a really awesome opportunity. So it's been great personally.
That was my favorite part too, the flexibility a little bit.
Any
Seems
other
like
brave
people are
students?
shy.
We don't fight.
No.
There you go.
Well, while people are thinking, one other thing I'll say, just kind of generic advice, but also I wouldn't be afraid to take jobs. You don't have to think that this is going to be your job forever. I mean, it certainly isn't now in the 21st century in the form of sort of capitalism we live under, but you know, we're not going to replicate the careers of our parents or our grandparents. So don't think that by committing to even a project or a job that's forever and that's going to define your professional career. It may be something, it may pan out in an unexpected way, but it may also be something you do for a year and then you're able to move to something else.
Yeah.
Cindy, Andy, any other pieces of advice you wish you had heard as a college senior, or that you heard that was tremendously helpful for you?
Some advice I wish I would have taken would be that this most recent, whatever catastrophe that I was facing, does not mean the world is over. You know, of course I didn't have a pandemic like we do now, but you know, even this will one day end. And you know, getting through that made me, you know, stronger and gave me, you know, really a chance to see my life differently, to see that, you know, this idea I'd had of what I would be when I was growing up could be completely different, and that would be okay. And you know, even if some might define it as failure, you know, getting through failure is a very powerful thing, and certainly made me stronger, and in order to get to where I am today.
For me, I think it's more, I guess, general advice. Because I feel like as a creative writing major, it's like I'm all about like feelings and like all of that. So I personally like to check in with myself, like in terms of like my intuition and my gut feeling about something. Because I've also had like things in the past where, like, for instance, law school, like I went because I took the LSAT and it was like a backup plan, but I really had no intention, because it was just the answer I would give people when they're like, what are you going to do with your English degree? I was like, oh, I'll just go to law school, so that they could just leave me alone, because I was still on my own personal like journey to figure it out. And so eventually I just like went. And I knew even after I like signed up or made it official that I was like, I don't want to do this. But I did it anyway because it felt like I should. And so I think recognizing what are shoulds and what are I want or I desire or I'm interested or I'm curious. That I think that's advice I think I carry throughout everything. What else? Oh, and in terms of looking for a job in a pandemic, I think this is a great opportunity to really start to, I guess, like find the people that you're interested in potentially working with in some capacity, and figuring out how to be in their sphere, because at some point they may be in the position to recommend or hire or are looking for something. Because I, like, even for myself, I'm often just looking for like another producer, or I need somebody who can edit, or just somebody who's open to learning something new because there's a project that's potentially coming down the line that needs like production support. And being like open to what that could be, because I've also encountered people in my hiring process that like aren't, and so they're looking for something very specific, right? And even if it's like close, they're just like, no, but then they always come back and like, oh, that thing that you just posted is really cool. And I was like, it's still in line with essentially the same thing. It's just like, instead of maybe it's a photo shoot PA, it's like now a video PA. And those two things are like essentially the same. It's just the time and the type of like organizing that you do around it. And so that's another thing. It's like, don't, I guess, judge a book by its cover in that way, or a job by its cover. And that can kind of help you along in your search. And then just connecting with people in an organic kind of way.
And I think, as this panel attests, it's easier than ever to bring people together from all over the country and all over the world to have a conversation. I think that job seekers now have the benefit of everybody being comfortable, or a little more comfortable than they were on Zoom for that networking call or that, cold call to a stranger.
Yes. I agree with that fully, because I definitely flew all the way to Boston for an interview from Atlanta once, and I like, it wasn't very long, but it would have been so much easier if I could have done it over Zoom.
Well, we are about at time. So on behalf of the Mellon Humanities Pathways Initiative, thank you all so much for being so generous with your time and your wisdom. I tremendously enjoyed this conversation, and I know that the students are grateful for your insight. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yeah.